When thinking of a theatrical performance and giving software demonstrations, should the demonstrator embody a character type like Cruella de Vil or Matthew McConaughey or Barack Obama when giving demos? What are your thoughts?
The Tony Moze Podcast.
Hello, everybody. You have reached the Tony Moze Podcast, where in this segment, I interview tech professionals of all levels in marketing, sales, pre- and post-sales on their journeys, hoping to inspire you to make the transition from your previous career and into the tech world. This is an audio episode with many video sequences to come. And if you are interested in other aspects, you can also follow me on other outlets, including LinkedIn at Anthony Palmozy, Twitter at Palmozy, and YouTube at Tony Moze, where I provide you with a different angle from my experiences as a former psychology worker and military veteran turned tech professional. Today's guest is Peter Cohan. He is the founder and principal of the Second Derivative and the author of the Great Demo methodology, focused on helping software organizations improve their sales and marketing results, primarily through improving organizations' demonstrations. The bulk of his experience is with complex enterprise software and strategic systems sold to varied audiences in a range of vertical markets. He has enjoyed roles in technical and product marketing, marketing management, sales and sales management, senior management, and the C-suite, as well as serving on the board of directors. In 2003, he authored Great Demo with a second edition in 2005, which is a book that provides methods to create and execute compelling demonstrations. On August of 2022, he wrote a book entitled Doing Discovery, the single most important element of software sales and buyer enablement process, which is available on Amazon. Peter has experience as an individual contributor, manager, and senior management in marketing, sales, business development, and as a member of the C-suite. Importantly, he has also been and continues to be a customer. He holds a degree in chemistry and is based in California. So without further ado, if you want the details, let's take a look into pre-sales.
The Tony Moze Podcast.
What was that tipping point or experience exactly before the light bulb went off in your head saying, I need to write this book?
So it occurred a couple years before I actually wrote the book. And by the way, thank you for showing a real live physical paper book. Such a rarity these days. There you go. Real live. Look at the stuff in between the covers are called, what is that called again? Oh, yeah, pages. So this is when I was at Symix Technologies. We had been growing up our sales team. We're getting to the point where we needed a CRM system. And I was leading the business unit, but I was also leading sales at that time. We said, let's bring in a bunch of vendors, let's see some demos, and let's make a decision. And each vendor, each CRM system vendor came in, they did 2-hour demos, and they all did the same thing. They started at the very beginning of the traditional CRM workflow. They said, let's enter a new opportunity, let's progress that opportunity, let's add a few people, let's run a marketing campaign. And they consumed 2 hours going through all these steps and never got to the portions of the demo that I, as the ultimate buyer, needed to see, which as a head of sales was, well, what does a head of sales want to see from a CRM system?
The head of sales, they want to see if it's going to be able to forecast the pipeline and be able to, right, to see what's going on per quarter, get predictive analytics. I'm starting to go a little too far, but
You nailed it. The two things that the head of sales wants are the forecast and the pipeline, and then you want to be able to drill down. In several instances of these demos, from I think it was 5 vendors, they never got to those screens. They simply said, and we have terrific reporting capabilities. So out of these demos, I suddenly had this epiphany, this Ryko, this flash of insight, and gathered my team together and said, guys, I have really bad news for us. What did you guys think? I said, of these demos. They were horrible. They were awful. And I said, well, guess what? We have been doing the same thing to our customers. I said, we need to take our demos and turn them upside down. We need to do the last thing first. And we started applying those ideas and practicing those principles. And over a period of about 2 years, really built out what became the great demo methodology. But the insight, the flash, was actually having been on the customer side of the table, being on the receiving end of terrible demos, which were traditional, and everybody at the time would say, well, that's the way demos are done. So that's where the do the last thing first came from. That's not the light bulb, though, that led to the you need to write this book. That came as a result of a separate story where a colleague of mine, actually the gentleman who's now the CEO of the company for which I'm on the board of directors, he came to me and said, I finally got a demo meeting with Merck, the big pharmaceutical company. He said, can you take a look at what we're going to do and give me some pointers? And before going over to his place to see what he put together, I started writing up some notes of some things I wanted to share with him around the idea of doing the last thing first. Saw the demo, came back home, started writing up some more notes to send to him, and I suddenly realized I was writing the book. It had sort of gushed out of me over a period of just a handful of weeks. So it wasn't like I need to write this book. It was, I guess I'm writing this book.
That's awesome. That's great to have that kind of serendipity, just go and just formulate into what you're doing, and then also having it written down to where now it's a book. You have, when I think of this, taking the demo and flipping it upside down, starting with the end first, it's making me think of Stephen Covey writing the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Start with the end in mind.
Pardon?
Start with the end in mind. Absolutely.
Yes. Now, would you say he was perhaps the the precursor, the pre-inspiration to you, maybe, somehow coming through osmosis, developing this idea?
It was actually my boss, the CEO of the company. I worked for him twice, and he was very, very skilled, very, very good at getting to the point. We'd be in a discussion with a prospect or a customer, or even just within the company. People would be going back and forth, and he would at some point say, "So what you're saying is," boom, and we'd all go, "Oh, yeah, that's it. It was just crisply summarized. And learning to model some of what he was doing took a lot of energy and a lot of effort, but it really, I think, was to a certain degree one of the key contributing factors to this idea of doing the last thing first, getting to the point, crisply, clearly summarizing what the prospect is looking for.
Yeah. Wow. It's reminding me too of essay writing. In high school, it was okay to write fluff. When we got to graduate school, everything was about being concise, brevity. It was that. If not, you are getting poor marks, for grades or whatever. So I feel that same thing, same idea translates into giving demonstrations, getting to the point, because that's pretty much what people want, right?
It's interesting. A colleague pointed out to me that in many of the services, the U.S. services, there is an acronym that is BLUF, B-L-U-F, which is bottom line up front. And it was instituted because people were drafting memos and documents where they would, talk about the history, they'd talk about all the options, they talk, and at the very end they'd ask or tell what they were looking for, or what they recommended, or what they wanted. And the military said, we're spending way too much time getting to the bottom, put the bottom line up front. This is to a certain degree, it's obvious. It's just in the world of demonstrations, has been this huge momentum associated with, no. We have to teach people how things work before we can take them to the very deliverables that they're looking for. It would be like, teaching somebody how a watch works on your wrist before telling them the answer to their question of what time is it?
Yeah. Wow. And you were you worked in chemistry. You were a chemist, right?
That's right.
And so you must have had to read a lot of empirical, a lot of scientific scholarly journals. And of course, they always start with the abstract. And then, of course, it gets into the introduction. Do you think that should be also tailored too for the reader? Or do you think that should always, that every one of those parts are important?
So this is a really interesting analogy, and I'm delighted you brought it up. When I'm working with scientific software companies, I actually will often hold up in my hand a referee journal article, and I'll ask them, when you have been asked to write a journal article, how do you write their article? And they all say the same thing. They say, well, first I have to list the history. I have to talk about the work that's been done before. I'll offer my hypothesis. I'll then design the experiment. I'll walk through the materials, the experimentals themselves, talk about the results, and finally offer a conclusion, okay, which is traditional demo method, if you will. And then I ask, how do you read a journal article? And the first thing they say is, oh, I read the abstract. And I say, aha, and why? And the answer is, because that is the crisp summary of what is in the article. And then it's interesting. I said, okay, so if you've read the abstract, what do you do next? Oh, well, I jump to the conclusion.
So true.
So it's the same concept over and over and over. Get to the freaking point.
Yeah. So you were part of the Anatomy of a Winning Sales demo with Sales Hacker in 2017, and where there was a presentation based on the analyses of 67,000 plus web presentation recordings. It reminded me of a theatrical performance when you looked at the graph and everything. And then you spoke about, the group spoke about acts 1, 2, 3, and 4, stuff that you hear in theater. When thinking of a theatrical performance and giving software demonstrations, should the demonstrator embody a character type like Cruella de Vil or Matthew McConaughey or Barack Obama when giving demos? What are your thoughts?
So this was a really interesting question. I gave it some thought, and I had two sets of answers, and I'll give you the first, and that is substance over style, always. Substance over style. Fundamentally, what the prospect wants or your customer is looking for are the facts. Just give me the facts. But that being said, as people in pre-sales, you want to be perceived as trusted and credible. Trusted advisor is the phrase of the day for the last few years. And so if I was thinking about actors, I would think in terms of people like, I don't know if Walter Cronkite is somebody that crossed your vision, not an actor, but a newscaster. Yeah. And we trusted him implicitly. We just did. And he would be that would be the embodiment. So any actor that basically engenders that feeling of trust and credibility would be somebody that I would suggest that you were trying to embody if you were looking for a character type. Who fills that description for you?
As a demonstrator?
No, as an actor. Who as an actor would you say, I just believe this person implicitly? He's very, very trustworthy.
Oh, I mean, I'm thinking of a couple people. I'm thinking of Alec Baldwin. I don't know. He has the presence. I'm thinking of Denzel Washington. Morgan Freeman. Tom Hanks. Pardon?
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks. Oh, Tom Hanks was great too. I mean, there's a few people definitely on the list that get if I were to tell them to do a demo, they should be the voice at least. The voice pardon?
I was saying, so yeah, there you go. I completely agree.
Yeah. So I was told to consider when speaking about something technical to convey it in a way that my grandparents or someone non-technical could understand. I know when it comes to giving software demos, there's inherently a level of refinement and sophistication when conveying information to one's audience. I mean, it's software. Mm-hmm. But would you say there are other parts of the demo where one should convey information as if they were speaking to a 5 or 9-year-old?
And go ahead, sorry.
And then the second part was, if there were a ratio of speaking technical to speaking to a child's understanding, what would that ratio look like?
So this is a very, very interesting topic, and can put people at great risk. You've got to map to your audience. You've got to map to individual job titles in your audience. So, for example, let's say we were talking about chemistry a moment ago. Imagine you're in a room with some chemists, some biologists, and some IT people. Okay, so you've got three different distinct languages. And your job in pre-sales is to be sufficiently conversant with all three languages to be credible and perceived as credible and trustworthy. Now, that being said, when you're communicating ideas from one language, if you will, to another, as opposed to talking down, what I would recommend is to use analogies and metaphors and stories, which we might come to later in this as well. So, for example, when you're talking about chemistry, a great analogy, and the chemists in the audience are going to scream at me for this, but is cooking, because cooking is chemistry very fundamentally. And so, if you're trying to explain chemistry to somebody in IT, you could use cooking in a restaurant or at home or at a convention as different analogies for different scales, if you will, of cooking for different types of chemistries or type chemistry production. Whether or not you're doing something for milligrams, or you're doing something in the tens of grams, or you're doing something on a production scale of vaccines for COVID, for example. So talking down, I think, is risky. Particularly when you're talking to other people that are technologically strong in their disciplines. Does that help?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. You just said before the audience, and I mean, it makes sense. Of course, if one were to work at a biotech company and they're trying to sell to that kind of customer, of course, you'll have the biologist there, maybe the chemist, an IT person. But have you seen such a disparate like a hodgepodge of so many personas before in a demo? And I mean, I could only imagine with a biotech company, but have you seen have you been on any demos or heard of any demos where there was just so many different personas that were even far off ledge that someone
all the time? Let's go back to our example of a CRM system. So if you just begin to brainstorm, let's say that the possible job titles that could be users or contributors to a CRM system, it could include salespeople, frontline sales managers, senior sales management, pre-sales, sales operations, marketing from the lead gen side, marketing from campaign management side, and the list goes on. I mean, you could easily have 10 or more significant job titles, all of whom have different perspectives of both what they want out of the system and what the system offers to them. Does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the title of your book rings a bell. It's a trademark, or it's definitely like I wish if you could correct me on that, but it's like the thing that just comes off your when you think of tissues, you'll call it Kleenex. For a while, Spanish people would call gum chiclets.
That's right.
So, yeah. So when you said that just before, the person who's able to just win the whole room, I call them the great demo, the great connector, but the great demonstrator. And that sounds almost like a Denzel Washington movie, The Great Debater. But
there you go, going back to the best actors. Yeah, and so terrific demonstrators will then partition the audience by job title and produce and deliver demo segments that are mapped to each of those individual job titles accordingly. So the example we were just talking about with CRM system, if you're presenting to the head of sales wants to see the forecast, the pipeline, be able to drill down, see which deals are solid, which ones are not, where do I need to coach my team, okay? Frontline sales managers wants the same thing, but at a detailed level, one level deeper. Frontline salespeople, all they want is to be able to put in the minimum amount of information that's required to progress the opportunity, and otherwise they want it to get out of their way. Marketing people don't really care about any of that. What they're interested in is, how do I track what's going on in terms of lead gen and justifying the marketing spend? How do I manage campaigns? They're totally different perspectives.
Yeah.
So does that help answer?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, that's great. And I could only fathom, being on a call, a demo where you have so many different personas from within the circle of concern and then outside of the circle of concern, and then being that great influencer, demonstrator to really be able to speak to each individual needs. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, the traditional approach had been to have a long linear demo that from time to time is supposed to embrace
Mm-hmm.
the interests and needs of the various players. But what that ends up as is known as the spaghetti demo. And if you think about a huge bowl of spaghetti, no sauce, just the spaghetti noodles, and it's sat for a while, what happens when you try to pull out one strand?
If you put it for a while, I think if you try to pull the strand, it's gonna rip, right?
It's going to rip, or you're going to end up with this huge clump. It's
Oh,
just a
okay,
mess. And that's exactly what happens in these traditional demos. It's a mess. You hear people saying things, okay, now I'm a marketing campaign, or okay, now I'm a salesperson, okay, now I'm in sales operations, and the audience's brains just swirling around going, I have no idea where this is anymore. So the concepts we teach in Great Demo are break it up into consumable chunks so that you're not trying to take a big wad of spaghetti and try to pick it apart, but rather have it partitioned, pre-partitioned for those individual job titles. And effectively are building small individual demos based on their specific needs and interests, completing them before you move on to your next. Another analogy would be, if you sit down at a table in a restaurant, they don't put a trough in front of you through which flows a continuous volume of food. Instead, they present discrete places and plates and courses that you can consume comfortably. Hopefully, you've got a period of time between this course and the next one. It's the same idea: bite-sized pieces, consumable components.
Yeah, that's great analogies. So I'm an ENTJ, so extrovert, intuitive, thinker, and judge personality type. Do you think personality tests could correlate to whether or not one is a fit to do demos?
Well, that is an interesting and potentially challenging topic. I have known a huge range of personality types, and I would say that generally speaking, successful pre-sales people are comfortable communicators. So that's probably more towards the extrovert side. Although when you ask pre-sales people, would you perceive yourself as an extrovert or introvert, they will generally label themselves as the more introverted side of things. So there's an interesting dichotomy that goes on here. How people choose to perceive themselves and how they actually act may be two different things. Here's one way to look at this. Instead of a personality test, when you're doing an interview for a pre-sales person, what I recommend is to do the normal, review the resumes and call references or whatsoever. But very, very often, vendors will, or a company will bring the candidate in and say, do a presentation, okay? And what we're assessing there is their ability to communicate outwards. That's been done for salespeople and pre-sales people for years and years. What I added to that mix, or recommend adding to that mix, is to ask that pre-sales person to do a discovery call with you, whatever topic they want, because you also want to assess their ability to ask questions and hold a conversation. And I don't know where it stands on the ENTJ, or other personality type spectrum, but I find this is a very, very effective way to actually assess pre-sales candidates' abilities for the skills that we really need them to be able to act on. Does that help?
Yeah. And then if we, you said this about the test, but what about, could the assessment be maybe a continuum? I mean, for how they do demos,
I think definitely so. Now, demos are, people that do demos typically are victims of momentum. They're victims of momentum. What I mean by that is whatever we have previously seen is what we tend to do. So the first time you see a demo, if you're planning to do a demonstration this Friday and you've never seen a demo of the software, you ask a colleague to show you a demo. They show you a demo, and what they show you becomes imprinted upon your brain as that's the pathway that I should follow because I don't know any other choice. That's where we tend to be victims of momentum. So I don't know if this is really answering your question clearly, but this is what we have to battle. We have to say, okay, I understand what I have seen. Now, how do I reassemble this in the appropriate pieces for this particular job title, that particular job title, this other particular job title?
Yeah, and I was thinking, companies and culture, or if their brand is, we do XYZ, and it's not necessarily the great demo methodology. I mean, well, first off, I want to know, how many companies do you think are still lacking in this kind of methodology? For
I probably the gross majority of software houses out there,
Wow.
by and large.
Wow.
It's an interesting observation. You can do demo skills training and make small incremental improvements. Little things like, don't move your mouse so fast, move it smoothly and deliberately. Slow down your pace of delivery. Be a little bit clearer with your word choice. Okay, those will make small incremental improvements to your demos. Great Demo actually offers what is known as a step change. So, and there's energy that has to be put into the system to accomplish that step change. So the organizations that have actually implemented and adopted successfully tend to enjoy very, very high success rates, partly because they have achieved a major step change versus what they've done before. So, that's sort of, again, a partial answer to what you're asking, but I hope it begins to at least add to the ideas.
Yes.
Should we develop that out further, or what's your pleasure?
I mean, and if we're going back to the continuum, or we're going back to maybe the culture, because I'm thinking, at least the latter question was, how do we get companies to break out of old traditions?
Yeah.
I mean,
there's two sets of problems. That anybody that's looking to make change faces, whether or not it's the vendor trying to convince a prospect or somebody within an organization. Number one, to recognize that you even have a problem. And I would say the gross majority of software houses do not recognize they have a problem with their demos. Victims of momentum, this is the way we've always done our demos, and we seem to be okay with our numbers. So problem number one is understanding that you actually have a problem. Problem number two, or challenge number two, is deciding how big that problem is. So is it something we're willing to live with, or is this really something that needs to change because of some large changes in our quotas or new products or whatever it is? We're getting beaten up by the competition. That often becomes a driver for that type of thing. So, in answer to your original question, sadly, maybe good for me in terms of many, many prospects, but I think the gross majority of organizations, software organizations out there, are just doing traditional, let me show you how this works demos. Those organizations that have made substantive change to great demo methodology have seen trajectories that literally hockey stick as a result of applying these things. And that's the difference between incremental change and true step change.
Okay. So yeah, I wanted to go back to the continuum idea, the assessment for it being in a continuum for how people do demos. Now I'm thinking, I was using this as a use case for large companies like Oracle, or, one of those mega, multi-million, billion-dollar companies that have teams so large that they're able to actually make sub teams or subcategories, like, pre-sales. You obviously have the account executive, then you have the account manager, you have a sales engineer, but then you also have a demo engineer, someone who's working just solely on preparing the demos or putting the RFPs together. And that's it, while the sales engineer is working ad hoc, working individually, and custom making their talk track, whatever, for those specific customers. Continuum, I guess I was thinking as an assessment for, hey, let's see where we may want to put this individual within this pre-sales area. What could he or she do? Like, so this was like, I mean, something that I was like just thinking about in my head as a continuum for where companies could be like, all right, well, we see that he or she is strong in this area of pre-sales, so we're going to put them here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So that's a really interesting topic. So when you look at a small organization, let's say less than 100 people, in many cases, the people that are called pre-sales, they're actually doing pre-sales. They're often helping with lead gen. They're doing pre-sales. They may be doing a little bit of sales, and they're often doing customer success and maybe even some customer support. They're doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
When you multiply that company size by a factor of 10 or 100, and you're now up at 1,000 or 10,000 employees, you get specialization across each of those elements. And as you just pointed out delightfully, that could provide you with some analysis as to, what is the best fit for this person. So, for example, if you've got somebody who really understands the technology and the software and understands what customers want, but is not comfortable being the presenter, man, put them in charge of the demo environment and building out the demos infrastructure for each new release and so forth. Conversely, if you have people that are gifted presenters, they're clear, they connect really well, wow, put them in the EBCs, the executive briefing centers, for example. And so doing an assessment, as you're saying, to really look at their personality types, where their strengths are, their weaknesses are, and so forth. If you've got this ability to specialize that way, that's a terrific way then to slice and dice your population.
Awesome. So I want to make sure I don't butcher the name, but you had a teacher named Mrs. Sassuli?
Mrs. Sassuli. She used to say, don't hit. We'd say, Mrs. Sassuli, and she'd say, don't hiss at me.
What a cool teacher, because, you've spoken about, your earlier lessons of how to demo with her when she said, the mantra, tell them what you're going to say it, and then tell them what you just told them. Like, that's so cool. Like, she seemed like a cool teacher to me. There
are occasionally those teachers that really succeed, and she was one of them.
Awesome. So you said Mrs. Sicily.
Mrs. Sassuli. Think Mississippi and just put a Suli on the end.
Sassuli. Gotcha. Awesome. So besides Mrs. Sassuli, who were some other inspirational people in your personal or professional experiences that were considered great presenters or teachers to you?
Interesting question. So one would be Guy Kawasaki, not from, let's say, the presenting side of things, but the ideation side of things. He actually helped to precipitate me writing the book in a side way. He has his seminal work, The Macintosh Way, he had a chapter called How to Give Good Demo, which was potentially going to be the title of my book until my wife said, no, you can't label it that. And I went, oh. Anyway, Guy Kawasaki, very, very good on ideation, had some great ideas that helped do this. A gentleman that worked for me for a number of years opened my eyes to something that fed into the demo world. He is entirely colorblind. He's red-green colorblind. And I cannot tell you how many demos and how much software is out there where green is good and red is bad. And people, do you have any idea what percentage of the male population is actually color deficient or colorblind?
I would say that, first, just dissecting it, more men are colorblind than women. And then out of men, I'm going to make the guess that it's probably anywhere between 40 to maybe 47%.
Okay, that's really high. So women, it's 0.5%. So 1 in 200 women. So it's very negligible. Men, it's 1 in 12. So about 7.5%. Okay. Which means, typically speaking, that if you have think of a security software or IT software where sadly much of the audience on the prospect side tends to be male. If you have a room full of 10 or 15 male prospects, the probability is very high that at least one of them is significantly colorblind or color deficient. And it was this gentleman was named Mark who taught me, number one, that this was an issue. Number two, they don't have signs saying, "Excuse me, I'm colorblind. You need to deal with that." And number three, then how to deal with it. And so this is something we actually teach in great demo workshops, that you've got to identify the colors for people, partly for people that might be colorblind or color deficient, but also partly that you never really know how things are rendering when you're presenting over the web or you're presenting over a projector or whatsoever. That was a remarkable thing. It opened my eyes
Yeah.
to color blindness. And then a third person is the gentleman I just referred to a moment ago, the CEO that, as I said, I reported to twice in two different companies, and it was partly just his method of presenting. Here's a story. So he was a very deliberate, slow presenter. And it used to drive me crazy until I was at a European users group meeting, and I fancied myself as a pretty good presenter. And I was in the bar, after days, sessions, meeting with a bunch of customers, and they were Germans. And over a beer or two, we started talking about presentations. And at one point, I was asking, "Well, who do you like as presenters?" And they said, "Oh, the CEO, Steve, he's the best." And I said, and I sort of went, "Huh?" And then I thought through it, and I asked them, well, what makes him so? I said, "Because he chooses his words and delivers them, et cetera, slowly and deliberately." He said, "We can follow everything he says perfectly." And I was like,
Wow.
suddenly got that realization.
Wow. With the rise of, UX, UI, user experience, user interface, and the sensitivity now about the thoughts of accessibility, making sure that we build out software and things that help for all different populations of people, hearing impaired, vision impaired, all that, so forth. You made me think about that, about having to have those kind of considerations within the demo. I mean, how do we, and how do we account for that? And it's an interesting thing. And also accessibility within people who are foreign language, who are not, I remember when I produced the video, I was making some music videos, and the people, overseas in places like Germany, they would say, "I like what you're doing, but I don't understand what you're saying. So if you can put some captions on the bottom," and I would enjoy it more. And because of that, I got more, more impressions, more views, more talk about it, more shares. But it also reminded me too that whenever we're putting things together, we have to think about accessibility.
Yeah, this is a huge topic, and I know I am still continually guilty of talking too fast. I still do it. Notwithstanding that, one of the things that we teach is international English. Just had a brief exercise yesterday. We're trying to set a team meeting with my group, and two of the players are in Europe. And one of the team members in Denver, in responding to an email message, said, when we were asking about various times, she says, "I'm out of pocket at that time." And I get an answer back from my European counterpart saying, "Out of pocket?" ? Americans and American software companies in particular, I should say North American software companies in particular, tend to have a very North America-centric view of language and data.
Wow.
The idea of country codes is foreign to most U.S. residents. They just don't even think about it. What's a country code? Well, actually, if you want to call somebody in Germany, it's +49. It's like +1 in the United States. Oh, I thought that was just so it was long distance. Data is meaningful. Phrases are very, very meaningful, and in some cases, completely confusing. What's the classic example? Go to the UK and say, okay, well, let's table that topic, and then see what happens. Do you know what I mean by that?
Let's table that talk. Can you tell? No, what does that mean?
So in the U.S., what does that mean?
Oh, when we say to table that topic, that means to just like stuff it in like a chest somewhere, right?
Yeah, it means we're not going to deal with that today.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
In the UK, when you table a topic, that means we're going to address it right now.
That's interesting.
So as I think it was George Bernard Shaw said, two countries separated by a common language.
Oh man, yes.
So these things, you know, these are all elements of doing demos that should be taken into account. It's not just can I go through the sequence of steps with my mouse? Am I a great presenter? It's really being attuned to the job title, the industry, the situation, the culture, the language, the time, even the time zone is meaningful. I cannot tell you how many U.S. companies schedule webinars for 9 in the morning Pacific time, 10, 11 in the morning Pacific time. Well, that's 8 p.m. in Central Europe. And most people in Central Europe aren't going to watch that webinar. They might watch the recording, but they won't watch it live because they have a life.
Yeah.
Or want to have a life.
Mm-hmm. So you wrote the book Great Demo on How to Give Effective Software Demonstrations. And typically, at least from the community I'm in, maybe I'm lost within the matrix of the pre-sales community, solutions engineers, sales engineers, solutions consultants, sales, a couple of other positions talk about this, but I feel this can expand to more people. Like, who else in tech you think should read this book?
Well, it was written primarily for pre-sales people initially,
okay,
who are actually putting together and delivering demos. However, there are salespeople should read at least salespeople should read this. Any salesperson in software should read this book because they should know what they want their pre-sales counterparts to be preparing and showing. Marketing people that are responsible for product and how to roll out that product and launch that product should be reading this. Sales and pre-sales enablement and operations people similarly should be reading the book because they're in theory enabling these processes to take place in coaching. Beyond that, though, maybe customer success, if they're doing demos, particularly for expansion and renewals, where they actually have to sell, if you will, because that is what they're doing. That would definitely make sense as well. Outside of that, though, I would not recommend it because it really is about demos.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, how about just to drive it a little further in terms of people who are looking to perhaps get into tech from from a non-technical industry or, background, could we say that those who have already been teachers, professors, tutors, psychology workers, and even public speakers should read this book if they're considering going into tech?
If they're considering going into one of the disciplines that we just mentioned, yes, definitely. I'll offer, though, I'm going to back up a little bit on this, and that is, it is good to have some so in other words, some experience with software demos before reading the book. And this may seem non-obvious, but there's how do I want to say it? There's a certain tendency that if you've never seen a software demo, you don't understand where some of the pitfalls are that we're trying to correct. And what I often tell people or suggest to people is go be a customer. Before you become a pre-sales person or before you go into sales or any of the other disciplines we just talked about, go be a customer and go sign up for a demo. In other words, go to a vendor's website, not B2C, but a B2B software vendor, something you're actually earnestly interested in. Could be a calendaring tool or productivity tool of some kind, and click on that book a demo button and go through the process of being a prospect, being interviewed, being assessed to see whether or not you are sales worthy, see what they do with respect to asking questions of you before they actually start showing you product, because that then begins to put this into context. And once you've done that or had some similar experience, then I think the book resonates that much more. Otherwise, it's like it's to a certain degree, you're working with a blank canvas and they can read it, but there's a little bit of lack of context. Does that resonate?
Yeah, of course, definitely. So last time we chatted, Peter, we briefly glossed over this idea of education and entertainment, or as newly called edutainment. Man, it's like holds dearly to my heart. Should the educational system place more emphasis on incorporating entertaining content into their education? Like, could you find anything confounding with doing a college lecture in heavy metal, rap, or pop music form, and the individual's ability with retaining the lecture's information?
So this is a fun topic. Are you familiar with this? Is somebody from way last century, like the 1960s? Tom Lehrer was a Harvard math professor who ended up making a delightful career doing musical ditties, humorous musical ditties. And he did a song called New Math. And I can still remember, I could actually sing it to you, which I won't because it would be boring for you, I assume. But the fact that it's stuck in my brain, you can't take 4 from 3. 3 is less than 4, so you look at the 8 and the 10's place. Now let's change it to 7 tens, regroup, change it to... He was teaching math as he was doing this fun little song. So there's definitely value in making education much more entertaining. Now, in the world of software, there are 3 pieces to what I would say to communication. There are facts. So it has this capability. That's a fact. And that is bow ring. So the fact is the thing that it is or that it does. And it's a very boring thing, and that's where a lot of people tend to live. The next level up are analogies and metaphors. And that's where you're being able to say, okay, so here's the thing that it does. It's like being able to do da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And the audience goes, oh, okay, now I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that provides clarity. But the highest level is a story. And we are wired, humans, for whatever reason, are wired for stories. And in fact, anytime, if you're in a demo or any kind of education, I mean, a demo is education in one form. Anytime you say, are you interested in the true story about, what happens to audience members when you ask that question? You're interested in hearing a story about, what happens?
They want to hear it.
Yeah, they all lean forward.
Yeah, that's
what they do this. They go,
I did this subconsciously.
Exactly. And this is, it's a human nature thing, as I said. I don't really understand the psychology behind it, but it is a human nature thing. And when you unwind a story that is relevant, that is focused, that is relatable, that has a twist of surprise in it, and a few other key, let's say, storytelling elements, those stories are sticky, and they live for hundreds or thousands of years. In fact, we will prove this out right now. I will give you the punchline, and you can tell me the name of the story. The punchline is, slow and steady wins the race.
Punchline.
That's the moral of the story. Slow and steady wins the race. Now, what's the name of that story? I'll give you a hint. 2 animals.
Oh, yeah, the tortoise and the hare.
There you go, the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah.
Okay, slow and steady wins the race. Now, how old is that story?
I could assume it's at least 40 to 50 years old, minimum.
It is 2,600 years old. 2,600 years. It is one of Aesop's fables. It was a sunny day in ancient Greece. He collected that story. He didn't invent it. He collected it. It had been in the verbal, whatever, lexicon for some hundreds of years, it's believed, before that. He collected it and chiseled it down to tortoise and a hare. Now, here's the kicker. The punchline, slow and steady wins the race, is boring. The fact itself is boring. In other words, my son, if you just persevere and work hard, you will do well and be rewarded. That's what the message is.
Yeah.
But if you remember the story, who's supposed to win?
The hare.
And what happens?
The hare did not win. It was the tortoise.
Because
right?
the hare zoomed out and went, oh, I'm way ahead. I'm going to go take a nap. The tortoise just placidly walked by him, didn't wake up the rabbit, and won the race.
Yeah.
So it had all the critical storytelling, successful storytelling elements, including this element of surprise. That's what has made it live in the human storytelling lexicon for 2,600 years. So with respect to demos and communicating successfully, facts are facts, but they are boring. Metaphors and analogies enable something to be relatable and better understood, but stories capture the idea and make it live for years and years and years. And so when you're telling a relevant story, and that's not a wrap a story around you demo, that's what I often hear people say, that's not storytelling. A story is a discrete, small thing, like the tortoise and the hare, that can be told literally in a couple of minutes, that encapsulates the key idea that you want people to remember. That's the entertainment factor, and that's the way to make it live for years and years.
Wow. So that is like the ideal way of entertaining in a professional, without breaching the boundaries of unprofessionalism. That way of doing a demo is by telling stories. That's so, I'm thinking that's a continuum itself. Like if you're telling facts, it's one thing, but a person who could tell metaphors is another. But if a person could tell a story and tell it well, they have completed the moment of mastery within demoing, and that shows the skill level and all that stuff. So
here's an example. Let's go back to the beginning of this interview, and I told a story about how the methodology came about. Can you retell that to a degree?
Yeah, you told me you started off because of your CEO. You had a CEO who spoke very deliberately. And
No. This was the sorry, wrong story. That's correct, but wrong story. The story about the demos that I saw on the CRM software demos.
Oh, the CRM software demos where people were starting and it took them 2 hours per segment, I believe. And basically, they were just boring people. that's what I recalled.
Yeah, and then I told what to my team.
Oh, because I remember the punchline was you made these people flip it over. So took the end and put it in the front and made the front the end.
Exactly. And that's the power of storytelling. See, it wraps the key idea inside something that can be remembered easily. And we just did it informally here that was 50 minutes ago.
Awesome. That's
proof.
The proof. And now you're making me think of things that are sticky to the mind, but how about this, like on the fly? I know in the military, like if they're trying to, come up with something strategic, they would outline it maybe in chalk or in sand and say, hey, I want, this to be over here. We're going to come in this way. We're going to flank, we're going to have reinforcements coming up here. Now, I'm thinking of, it's so funny because now they're using these words now, like war room leader, or like, everything's like almost related to military these days. And like, what are your thoughts about like doing demos in a sense at a bar or a restaurant, by you taking a napkin and writing stuff down there? Like, what are your thoughts about that? Demoing with a napkin.
Welcome to startup world. This is, what you just described is where many companies have begun. Is two or three or four people gather together at a table, drinks, a bar, whatever it is, and they start ideating something, and napkins are involved, and then the next thing you know, you have VMware.
Nice. That's so awesome. So, Peter, if Great Demo became a Hollywood movie, which actor or actress would play the role as a great demonstrator?
A great demo. Well, this goes back to where we were before. So I would love Tom Hanks. For me, he's totally believable, particularly in the later movies. Who else? I don't know. Do you have any suggestions?
It depends. Are we going to have the voice, or are we going to actually have the person standing there, with both the voice and the gesturing?
I have it, and he sadly just passed away recently, but Sean Connery.
Oh my God. Yes.
Wouldn't he be perfect?
He would be great.
And if we move the mouse here.
Yes, he would be perfect. Definitely. Now, what about an example of telling a story? I mean, like, how would one be able to tell a story to a customer? Like, do we go once upon a time, like like a bedtime story? I mean, again, just being silly, but nevertheless, like, how would one really tell a story on a demo? What's a brief example?
So some of the best stories are collected and used anecdotally.
Okay.
And I'll give you a small example. You're sitting next to a customer, and a real customer, not a prospect, and they're showing you how they were using the software to solve some particular problem, and you go, "Whoa, that was really cool." 2 days later, you're with another prospect who's describing the same problem but has not yet seen a solution, and you say, "Oh, I was just with a customer 2 days ago who had the exact same problem. What he was able to do was blah, 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 blah. He was able, as a result, to get this done in a fraction of the time, and what he tells us now is blah, 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 blah." That is a customer success story. Those success stories, when retold with a little bit of drama, are extraordinarily compelling and valuable. And that's something we can actually teach people to do, is how to collect those, clean them up to a certain degree, and then reuse them. In Chip and Dan Heath's seminal book on storytelling called Made to Stick, which everybody should read, Pre-Sales or Sales, they offer the following comment: never tell a good story once.
Wow. Awesome. So if people are seeking, besides the book, obviously people have to get this book too, great demo. Like, what other services do you provide currently?
So the book is really almost a lost leader. I love it when people read it, and it's great if they can begin to change behaviors as a result. Majority of what we offer as a business are great demo workshops, where we are embracing a team of 10 or 15 or more people to actually work them through the process of preparing and delivering new demos, applying great demo principles. So great demo workshops, seminars, webinars, and training services are what we do. Greatdemo.com, that's the website where you can find out more information. And in fact, more than welcome to reach me. You could just type in info@greatdemo.com, and that will get to me directly.
Awesome. And where are the other places people can find you?
All over. We've done a fairly large number of webinars. Actually, if you go to the website, greatdemo.com, you'll see under the resources pages, there's a blog. There are 85-ish articles on various demo and demo-related topics. There's a listing of a pile of webinars that are all free and available to watch. There's the book as well. I think those are probably the major places that one could find me and find information from us.
And LinkedIn?
Sorry, absolutely. Thank you. The LinkedIn group. That's right. How could I have forgotten? There's the Great Demo LinkedIn group, which is a little bit of an online users community. It's got about 7,500 members, I think, right now. And a large portion of those are either Great Demo Workshop graduates, and or have been practitioners in one way or another, and or have at least read the book. So these are people who are interested in furthering, evolving, and understanding how to apply the methodology.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Peter, again for coming on the show.
Truly my pleasure, and I had a terrific time. Thanks so much for the interview.
Take care, everybody.